All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and call this workshop to order, although we do have a city manager, and we have Commissioner Mazon coming in right at the bell. Good job, sir. Let's have, let's have an approval of the agenda as it was published. I have a motion from Commissioner Martin. Second from Commissioner Clark. Any comments, questions on the motion on the floor from the dais? Public comments, questions on the motion on the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passed unanimously. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Clark.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Arr! Damn hemorrhoids.
Okay, we have one item on tonight's agenda. It's the overlay district. This potentially could be the last one, depending on the feedback that you guys give us. So, Mike, anything we need to do in terms of introductions, or is staff ready to jump right in?
Mr. Mayor, just to echo your sentiments, this likely could be the last workshop, but I don't want the commission to think it wouldn't be their last bite at the apple. Once the commission feels comfortable workshopping, then the next thing that happens is we'll bring back draft format. This is what we're thinking. Final round of comments to that, and then a proposed ordinance would go to P&Z for consideration and comment, and then that comes back to the commission for 2 readings for final adoption. So there's a couple of public hearing chances for the commission to consider this, but I think in the workshop formats where we have the best Q&A and the best opportunity to dig into issues, and then we'll be tweaking towards the end. And I was just going to mention, in the last couple of meetings, we've seen more feedback issues with our mics. Digging into that, what we're finding is that when we don't project well individually, if we're quiet, they turn up the volume in the back, and that's when feedback occurs. So ask everybody to remember to speak up, like your mama said. And
your mic a little bit closer to you like that. That helps somewhat. And we now have the ability to mute the podium from the back of the room. So let's just leave the green light on the whole time.
Awesome. Good thinking.
And we won't have to worry about that. They'll mute it so there won't be any feedback here. One comment on about whether or not we have any more workshops. The more feedback we give, not this kind of feedback, more feedback we give to these guys in this process, the quicker we can get this done. We still have 2-3 applications that are in the hopper waiting. Correct. For this overlay district to be completed. So the more conversation we can have tonight, the more and more efficiently they can do their business, and we can get to those other readings.
Great thought. So with that, I'll introduce Brian and our consulting team to get us into workshop number 2.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, just you've seen them up here before. Our consultants, CHW, are here to present the second round of information after the first workshop. They've taken the information that you've provided and consolidated that somewhat into a more cohesive presentation, and they're going to go through that with you and then get your additional feedback to go to that next step. So with that, I'll turn it over to CHW.
Not all of you at one time, though. Hey.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. Ryan Thompson with CHW. Thank you for allowing us to come back before you and discuss. Just want to, go over generally kind of our plan, kind of, refresh all of our memories about why we're here, what we're, tasked with. Then go into what we heard from the last workshop, and then go into recommendations that we put together for each of those major topics. Green means go. So why are we here? Obviously a lot of people are moving to Florida every day. I think the current estimate is around 1,000 people. a lot of pressure is being put on rural cities like the city of Newberry, where they're able to move away from larger cities and have a more rural lifestyle. And it is imperative that we preserve the character of our community through experiencing this growth. Guidelines, standards, regulations, those all ensure that the quality of life in Newberry is preserved. So we're trying to achieve regulations that result in development patterns that match your vision and establish a dialogue here where we can create regulations to guide the future development in the city. You're very familiar with this. I'm sure at this point there are about 17 different projects, and they probably have grown since this was created, of major projects that are in some form or another, some place in the development process in the city of Newberry. The outcomes of this will be new regulations. They'll apply to the State Road 26 and US 2741 corridors, and they'll address architectural character, building placement, site access, screening, and signage along those corridors. The process started in January, and we expect around June, maybe July, for this to be adopted. I won't repeat what Mr. New stated as far as the next steps. And then as far as who is encouraged to participate in this process, everybody, including citizens, stakeholders, volunteers, advisory boards, and of course elected officials. And I'll just read this statement. The city wishes to create and facilitate an all-inclusive process that engages all interested persons so the outcomes created are built on collaboration and community consensus. So with that recap, I'll just go into what we heard from the last workshop. And please, if there is something that we didn't hear, something that has come to your mind since that time, please let us know. This is a perfect time for that discussion. For architecture, we talked about Country Way and what a great example that was. It's updated, but not too modern. It's inviting. The color, the architectural style ties back to Florida, but it's not a traditional architectural style that you would think of, with warm colors and local materials, not polished metal materials. We want to ensure that there's a high quality standard, that when your staff is reviewing site plan applications or subdivision applications, that they have sound regulations to be able to evaluate those applications. At the same time, we're trying to balance to where it's not too restrictive. And then we also identified the downtown historic district and how that's kind of its own. And it's okay for that to be its own. It has older buildings, they're much closer to the street, and it's an established district. And outside of that, along these corridors, can be different. For building placement and site design, we looked at kind of a tunneling effect, I think was a term that was used. As you come into the city of Newberry, you have a more broader expanse, just kind of visually, and then as you come into the core, that kind of narrows down. So your building setbacks, your screening, and all that plays a role into, I'm in a more rural area, and okay, now I'm in a downtown area. Then exposed parking lots, didn't want to have very large anything over 100 parking spaces. We want to have some kind of screening there, so that wasn't the predominant feature along that portion of the corridor. And then interconnectivity, shared driveways, limiting the number of driveways along those State Road 26 and 2741 to where it doesn't impede traffic, it's much safer, and it has much more continuity along the corridors. For landscaping, really focusing on what can be seen from the road, reducing or increasing the screening based on the road speed, like I talked about before with that tunneling effect. Residential frontage, we had a good discussion about homes that may back up to the road and how that might be screened with a combination of berms or landscaping or open space. And then commercial frontage, which is probably going to be a prominent use along the corridor, and how we can reduce the visual impact of that. The Jonesville Publix and Tyoga were two examples that we looked at there of a good balance between landscaping but still being able to see the development, so you have to know it's there in order for it to be successful. For signage, we want it to be compatible with buildings, so both in materials and designs. It helps with that sense of place and giving a theme and character to a development. The Countryway Town Square water tower is an excellent example of that. Need standards to guide design, both establishing kind of a baseline for staff to be able to evaluate signage plans as they come in, but again, that balance, not too restrictive. Then also scaling for road speed, we looked at that, and not screened or hidden by landscaping. And then we had some discussion on pylon signs, and we'll discuss that here shortly. So Lori Hall was not able to be here this evening, so I'll roll right in and cover her material. I hope I do her material justice. So looking at the built environment, the architectural styles, we had a conversation about Florida vernacular, what's characteristic of your downtown versus kind of non-vernacular, modern buildings. And our biggest takeaway was it wasn't a specific architectural style. There are some examples of more modern things that, could fit along these corridors, but it was more of having elements of architecture that gave the building character, that it was, so we want to stay away from big, expansive, blank walls. So in that vein, we want to encourage you to incorporate, or we want to incorporate no fewer than 3 architectural elements for facades that are visible from the right-of-way. Here are some examples of those. So accent materials, architectural details, roof lines, shutters, and there are more that we can include here, but really kind of breaking up that blank facade and not focusing on a specific architectural style. For land uses and building form, we sorry, I didn't realize this was animated. So we talked about different uses, both gas stations, car washes, self-storage units, and I think initially you may want to exclude those from being located along the corridor because traditionally they are kind of eyesore uses, but they are useful. Okay, and a lot of more current designs are attractive. And sometimes you may not know exactly that they're a gas station or a car wash or self-storage. So really focusing on how those buildings are presented. So including specific use standards for those type uses. And some of the examples are for fueling stations, locating the fuel pumps to the rear or the side, and not being the most prominent feature on the street. Car wash tunnels, want to orient those away from the street in residences. And then self-storage units. The exterior storage bays cannot be oriented towards the street. In the examples here in the bottom right, both of those buildings are storage units, and you can see the units inside through the windows, but you wouldn't at a glance know that those are storage units. Building placement and orientation. Here are two examples that go at this kind of almost opposite directions. So with the town of Tyoga, you have a large stormwater basin and landscaping and even buildings, for that matter, that block the majority of the parking areas. And then in Butler Plaza, you have out parcels that block the expansive parking. So encouraging, we don't want to limit the location of parking because that could deter some very suitable tenants, but we do want to encourage that if there are over 100 parking spaces, that there is some screening, and whether it be open space or stormwater, landscaping or out parcels, something to kind of break up that sea of parking. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ms. Kaylee Toller.
Hi, good evening. My name is Kaylee Toller, and I am a landscape architect with CHW. So I'm going to be running through the site-specific elements, which include site landscaping and buffering, as well as signage. So overall, our site landscape recommendations, we had a pretty detailed discussion about that during our last workshop. And like Ryan had mentioned earlier, we talked about having a tiered approach or kind of a tunneled approach where maybe at, further away you have heavier buffers. As you get closer to the downtown or the historic district, that buffer gets smaller as you get closer to town and the density increases. So I'll show you on the next few slides, we've developed a zone system to kind of dictate that. But some of our other items that we address, that we're going to be addressing in the code language, is setting minimum size and quality standards for plant material. So for example, a 30-gallon tree, we're setting an actual size of the tree at planting. Same thing for shrubs. Developing a recommended tree list. So making sure that we're keeping in the character of the city of Newberry, the existing rural character. So we're developing a plant list for the canopy and understory trees. Developing requirements for roadway buffers. I'll run through that in a lot more detail in the next few slides, but that goes in line with the zone system that we just talked about. Specifying that residential buffers have to be required along the backs of lot lines whenever they're visible from the right-of-way. So making sure that there's additional like berm, fence, wall, something in addition to make sure that the backs of those lots are not visible from the right-of-way or are properly screened.
Can I stop you on that?
Sure.
Because I see these, what's the one that initiated this particular Newberry Corners? Is that the one across from RPM Auto? Starting to get confused. They've got a 6-foot fence there, but you can still see in the backyard.
Yes.
So how do you say, okay, we don't want to see the backyard? So, because the developer can say, well, I got a fence there, right? That's what you said, you have to have a fence. But I think what the intent of that is that the buffer has to be such that it prevents us from seeing the toys and the trampoline and all that kind of stuff, so that it really is a barrier, so that you have greenery in front.
Yes.
Does that mean we need to tighten that language up, or maybe the commission's not envisioning that? When I think of a buffer, I think I want to see green space. I don't want to see, so if the ground goes down and your 6-foot fence still lets me see right in, that didn't accomplish the intent.
Yes, that's, from our conversations with staff, it sounded like the intent was to completely screen, as much as feasibly possible on day one, to provide that screen. And you're correct topography has a lot to do with that, and also where the buffer is placed in proximity to the backs of lot lines has a lot to do with that as well. If you're, 100 feet back from the property line, that's a lot of room for topography to go up or down. So if you put a 6-foot fence on the property line, it might not do anything for the backs of lots. So that is something that we're considering. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Coleman.
Yeah, you get anywhere, you start heading down south, especially towards Orlando, it seems like every subdivision, everywhere you go down there, it's nothing but a solid wall, I mean, it comes to my mind is like evergreens or whatever, something that's just a daggum fence.
Berms and
Right,
vegetation.
berms, which that looks like what Tripp's doing over here, or he did on the other side of the railroad tracks with that big berm he's got.
And then stuff planted on top. Perfect.
Right. It's a lot better than having a, block wall sitting there. That's all you see down, like I said, anywhere heading towards Orlando, Tampa.
Yeah.
Looks terrible.
Mr. Mazon.
Well, is it Ocala?
I mean, I just want to make sure that the intent, the language is clearly, because we get into a lot of, it says a fence. I put up 3 strands of barbed wire. There's a fence, right? The intent is to visually block. I think the greenery looks best because that's kind of what we're trying to keep along the corridors, is that green, small town feel. I don't want to get into too specifics, because I think there's financial costs that we can't foresee. But however we're going to aesthetically prevent, us from seeing like Newberry Corners, that's the language I want to see in there.
That makes sense.
Commissioner Clark?
Mr. Mayor, I think you're absolutely right. I just think this is a language change, and then we will decide for that subdivision, how big a berm, how much vegetation, wall or fence, but I think you're right. I think more than anything, just a language change so we can determine that here.
So the next one is providing recommendation for screening of vehicular use areas. So making sure that any parking lots or storage areas, loading docks are properly screened. And also providing recommendations for some landscape plantings within stormwater management areas when they're visible from the right-of-way. So this is the map that indicates where those zones are located. So we've developed 3 different zones. They extend outward, starting at the center. So 3 zones to scale the screening. The zones are based on the distance from the city's core. So 1, 2, and 3 miles from the city's core. And they're they're at 1 mile increments. And they're identified by the closest streets. So that map indicates where those zone extents would be located. And we also discussed excluding the historic district from this because they have their own separate guidelines.
How did we get to the 500? Because the last time we were talking about what the distance back, whether it was what the visible eye could see off of the main corridor is 500 feet, roughly what the visible, I mean, because it depends on what we're building here, it's going to block.
Right.
Is 500 just sort of a ballpark? Is there some leeway in that?
I think Ryan might be able to speak a little bit more detail to that specific number, but yes, in general, that was kind of the number that when we're looking at sites, that's kind of, if it's past that, you are really not going to be seeing it from the roadway. Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, I think as a casual observer and passerby, 500 feet's reasonable. That's certainly negotiable. There wasn't a lot of science put into that number, so we had to put some kind of parameters on it, but I think as that corridor fills in, those properties within the 500 feet will be the most evident from the road. Now, if something, you could, look over and you could see 1,000 feet, right? So, but you're probably going to have some development before that occur closer to the roadway. It's kind of the thought that we had when we were looking at that.
Mike, give me an example of 500 feet. 500 feet encompass all of the equestrian center? Or would it be about half of the equestrian center?
Block and a half.
Block and a half.
Would it be
Stand here.
Newberry Road to
all
Publix?
to the railroad tracks.
Newberry Road to Publix in Tyoga?
Publix and Tyoga is probably to the back of
It's probably close to 500 feet.
To the back of Publix? Okay. All right.
So
To the back
the
property line.
From the property line to property line.
The equestrian center has all of the
Swales.
retention pond, everything in the front, which I like that, but if that's gonna be a requirement to kind of create that tunneling effect, well, then maybe the district has to be deeper as you get closer in. So if you're out to 202, it's 500, maybe as you get in, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud here. I didn't mean to stop you, go ahead.
So this is the kind of example diagram that we showed you all last time, showing a couple sites along the main state road. So we're showing, potential commercial areas up front. We're showing some stormwater management facilities, stormwater basins, and then the residential areas set back. And so this kind of just shows maybe some potential examples for buffers. Again, this is still something that we're exploring the specifics of what all of those buffers look like, what constitutes those buffers, the widths that are the best widths. But we've kind of broken them out into two different categories, commercial and residential. So from the last workshop, there was a lot of discussion about making sure that we're not blocking commercial uses by providing prohibitively, large buffers. And there was also discussion about making sure that we're screening residential, especially when the lots are backing up to the right-of-way. So we've kind of separated them into two different categories and have been moving forward in that way. So these are some first takes at some buffer widths. So starting with zone 1, so this is 1 mile outside of the core, excluding the historic district. For this area, because it's a smaller buffer, we're not really splitting it between commercial and residential. It's kind of for all uses at this point. We're thinking maybe a 15-foot wide buffer with 2 trees per 100, canopy trees per 100 feet, limiting the amount of understory trees so that we maximize visibility. And within that 15-foot buffer, providing an 80% coverage of shrubs, ground cover, and grasses. This is the Zone 2 buffer, so 2 miles outside of the core. So now we split it into commercial uses and all other uses. So commercial uses have less trees, so there's 3 trees per 100 linear feet. The total widths are the same, they're 25 feet. But you see in all other uses, we have 2 canopy trees per 100 linear feet. And then when we get into the understory trees, for the commercial uses, we don't have any understory trees for maximum visibility because those canopy trees are going to be able to be limbed up and provide visibility into the site for commercial uses. For all other uses, we have 3 understory trees per 100 linear feet. And then same thing with the 80% coverage. And these diagrams kind of show you what that looks like per 100 linear feet. And then the Zone 3 buffer is the biggest buffer, so you're 3 miles out from the core now, and that's a 50-foot buffer. For the commercial uses, you have 4 canopy trees per 100 linear feet and no understory trees. And then for all other uses, you've got 3 canopy trees per 100 linear feet and then 3 understory trees. And then because a 50-foot buffer is a really wide buffer, we've reduced that coverage of shrubs, ground covers, and grasses to 50%. And we also are working on some language to try and make sure that that is not just a parallel line to the property line. You know, we don't want a straight line. We want it to be natural, feel organic. So we're working on kind of coming up with language and looking at some comparable jurisdictions to try and figure out how we can work that language the way we want it. So we've put together some examples of what these Zone 1, 2, and 3 buffers might look like. So the first comparable is the Tyoga Town Center. And this is a pretty good example of what a Zone 1 buffer might look like. It's about 5 to 10 feet, seems wider, but the trees are really mature and they've really filled out, and so the canopy trees are kind of the star of the show for this buffer. The shrubs and ground covers, there's really only about 5 to 10 linear feet along the back of the sidewalk there. There's about 2 trees per 100 linear feet, so essentially a canopy tree per 40 or 50 feet. So that's a pretty good example of what that might look like. Another good example of what that might look like is this comparable from down in the villages. Again, it's only about a 5 to 10 foot buffer width, so maybe 2 or 3 rows of shrubs and ground covers, and then you've got maybe 2 or 3 trees per 100 linear feet. Sure. Yes, Commissioner.
Mr. Farnsworth.
When you have trees like that, who maintains them? Is it the developer or is it the city of Newberry?
I think it's the developer.
It would be the developer as long as it's on the developer's site, which in these situations it will be.
And do they ever deed that land over to the city at any time, like they do the streets and stuff?
It could go either way, Mr. Mayor. I think typically we would recommend that street trees be pushed back of the right-of-way line so that they provide shade for the sidewalk, as you see right there. But the overall responsibility would be the adjacent property owner. And no, they dedicate the right-of-way to us. Usually the right-of-ways are pretty full, having the sidewalks and the asphalt surface in there, so it's hard to get a street tree in there. I think you would need 10-foot wide strip to get a tree to successfully grow between a curb and the sidewalk, which is why we tend to put them on the back side of the sidewalk there.
So the next example is the Jonesville Publix, which we talked about in the last workshop. From our measurements, it's about 25 feet. It's got, good amount of shrubs and ground cover and about 5 trees per 100 feet. This one, there's quite a few trees. There's a variety of understory and canopy trees in there. So that would be a good example of what a zone 2 buffer might look like at maturity.
Real quick, is that 25 feet from the curb?
This one, we've measured 25 feet from the right-of-way, so
From the curb.
probably the back of sidewalk.
Sidewalk.
In this case.
Back of the sidewalk. So that thing's pretty, that's 30-something feet then, out to the road. 35 feet? Okay. Nice.
So this is another example, and this is kind of a good contrast. So the one that we just saw would be one at maturity. This is one that's more recently planted. I think this one was planted maybe 2018, maybe 4 years ago. And obviously this Google Street View isn't up to date. It's much more filled in now. But this is Oakmont along Parker Road. It's about 10 to 25 feet wide. And there's about 5 canopy trees per 100 feet. And this one also has an example of what a combination of berms with vegetated landscape might look like. I'm sure many of you have driven by there, but it might, next time you drive by Parker Road, might be good to look at that and see how that feels. This is another example of the Zone 2 buffer. This is Oakmont on the Southwest 24th Avenue side, so the north side. Again, 10 to 25 feet width and about 5 trees per 100 feet. And then this frontage has a decorative aluminum fence with columns. So then Zone 3, which is the heaviest or most dense buffer, this is an example from the villages. There's a lot of really nice buffers in the villages. This one is about 30 feet wide, about five trees per 100 linear feet, and it's very nice, very shaded. You can see that the area between the back of the curb all the way back to the parking lot is really nicely landscaped. So that kind of summarizes the landscape buffers. Going to talk about site access for a little bit. These are some examples that we showed.
Can you hang on one second? Do we have any other thing about landscaping? Any questions, those kinds of things before we go on to site access? Commissioner Martin?
How is it that the berms are included as part of the buffering? I mean, we talked about width, we talked about plants and all that. How do we incorporate the berm aspects?
So there's several different ways that
Yeah, and I kind of like the latter part of how you're saying that. And all this stuff that we're talking about makes sense to people who do this, right? Because I get kind of lost in the particulars and caring about 100-foot versus 200-foot, whatever. But all that stuff makes sense to developers and people who are doing that kind of stuff when they start doing plans and all that. This is kind of common knowledge for those folks, right?
yes. we're trying to make sure that this is something that's easily implementable and easily followed. So that when people come through, when developers come through, they can actually read it and understand it.
Okay. And you're telling us that they do?
Yes.
Okay.
The
All right.
final version will be, yes.
All right.
Commissioner Clark.
Mr. Mayor, I think what Tim said, is it cost? Is that what you're asking, Tim, in this? I mean, the developers know, so there ain't like a cost burden on these developers. They kind of know what this is all about when we go into it. Trees and the shrubbery and the berms, and they've got it. They don't say we got to add $500,000 to our project because of this.
I think maybe what Commissioner Martin was asking was making sure that the requirements weren't like too confusing to understand
And
from
cost.
project to project and to implement. Is that?
Yeah, and yes, I mean, we see enough of this around. There's lots of examples. I'm just, because I'm completely ignorant about this kind of stuff, but just confirming that it makes sense to people who actually speak this language and do this kind of stuff. So clarification, ease of interpretation, all that stuff.
Yes. We're in the process of writing this language. We're making sure that we've researched a lot of different jurisdictions and a lot of different code to make sure that this is comparable and it's not unnecessarily complex.
Mr. New.
Mr. Mayor, I think both are excellent questions, and it's something that has occurred to me often, but I haven't shared it with the commission. There was genius, in my opinion, behind Brian and the planning team selecting a local civil consulting firm to help us with this. They work with cities, but they represent clients far more than they represent cities. So part of their charge is to make sure that their clients, their future developer clients, will understand what we're talking about. Also, I've just found in working with them through this, they understand the ideas that are onerous cost-wise and the ones that developers do readily because you get tons of bang for your buck. And that's a dialogue during our staff meetings with them, is making sure that we emphasize the thing that bring great value and that we don't focus in on some obscure little thing that makes doing work in Newberry cost not effective. So just it's a good opportunity to comment to the commission on those ideas.
Well, and I agree, and I appreciate all the local examples because I'm a visual guy. I think to Commissioner Clark's point, there absolutely is going to be somebody that stands at that podium and says, you guys have added $500,000 and it's too expensive to do business in Newberry. I just want to remind everybody, what we're talking about is 500 feet back along our main entrance corridor. We're not talking about the entire city of Newberry. Right. We're talking about, when I had the same question that Commissioner Martin did, does this, because all of this, every 100 feet, this, every 100, you're a landscape architect, so this is in your wheelhouse. To me, this sounds really, really technical. Like, can it be 99 feet? I mean, do I get a little bit of leeway? But I think, for people who want to build developments like Tyoga, that want to build developments that look like that, absolutely is in their wheelhouse. They know exactly what they're getting into, and they're probably going to say, yeah, I appreciate that because I don't want to put my upscale neighborhood and then have something that looks terrible come in right next to it. So let's just make sure the narrative is consistent. The overlay district is 500 feet right now. You guys can go 6 down to 4. This is not the entire city of Newberry. If you want to build a different kind of development, we got a huge urban service area, right? But if you want to build along the corridors, that entranceway, that cultural feel that we're trying to maintain, this is what we're asking for. So, but someone will stand here and say, you guys have added $500,000. You're micromanaging me. I got to put a shrub here and a tree there, so that will happen. Come on down, Tripp. Now, do we need to put a 5-minute timer on Tripp, a 10-minute timer? The light's broken, so he.
Yeah, I was just curious about the
Tripp Norfleet, just for the record.
Tripp Norfleet. The 500 6-foot strip y'all are talking about in Zone 3. I'm just clarification on that. Exactly what is that?
I got to admit, I'm still a little bit confused about the zones. I get the 26 and 27, 500 feet off of that. I get that part. The rest of it, I'm a little bit, hey, sit down right here, Tripp. Yep. Is that the zoning question though? What,
On the 500 feet in Zone 3.
you got, Ryan's got the zone?
The further out, the faster you're going, the more you want that depth to be brought into that gateway. So when you get in close to the city and you're only driving 30 miles an hour, you may only have to extend that depth of the gateway, 100 feet or 200 feet, right, to catch the block. But if you're out there on 26 or 2741, you're going 65 miles an hour, those stores that are at that greater scale, you want to make sure that that zone is taking in across that major parking field between the road and the actual big box.
Okay, I think I'm honing in on your question. Are you honing in on it, Tripp? So, tell me, can we put the map of the zones back up?
I'm just curious, in that 500-foot zone, what can be in that zone?
I think Ryan's been itching to answer the question here.
Either that or
You could tell. So the 500 feet zone will allow residential, allow mixed use, allow commercial. It's just how those uses are developed. So there may be higher density buffers or orientation of like a fueling station canopy we'd recommend to the rear or side. And so there may be some design characteristics. Yes, sir. Exactly.
That's where I thought we were headed.
And then I have one more.
Come on back. So zone 1 has the highest level of scrutiny. Or is it flip-flopped? Zone 3 has the highest level of scrutiny. Zone 1 has the lowest? Ryan, just give me a head nod, yeah.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, so the zones only apply to the buffers, and they really correlate to the depth of those buffers. So in Zone 3, which is from, I think, 218th Street to, the extent of the city's limits, that's a 50-foot buffer along the corridor. Then, as you come a mile further in, it reduces down to 25 feet, and then even further into the core, it's.
Okay, I'm with you now. I'm with you. Right.
So my question was, in that 500-foot buffer, stuff can be in it. It just has to be more scrutiny on the commercial.
Right. Right.
Regulated by this, whatever's in there is regulated by.
And then whatever y'all do on the tree deal, don't do like Tyoga and put them trees between the street and the sidewalk.
Yeah.
They made us do it at Finley Woods too, and they're helping grind them sidewalks every year, something kind of bad. And I guess that would be behind the right of way is what you want, right?
Yeah, and the city has to maintain them when they're in the right of way. And frankly, when we mow right of ways, it's for traffic maintenance, and, we're not in the landscaping business. So we try to push the landscaping back to where developers are doing it weekly. And the things that are in the right of way are things that could withstand our 4 times, 6 times a year type of maintenance. Agreed.
Yeah. Okay, on-site access. Anything else about landscaping? All right.
We can always go back. Okay, so site access. So these are some examples that we talked about last time of kind of, the one on the left is in Gainesville, and it has a kind of continuous drive access. There's a continuous curb cut on either side, and that just allows for a lot of vehicular potential clashes, as well as pedestrian vehicular clashes. So what we want to do with our code language for this overlay is limit the driveway exit and entries onto the main road, and keep them between developments as much as possible, or on the secondary roads as much as possible. We've talked about frontage, encouraging not just a singular frontage, but double and triple frontage, so that the building facade can be viewed from multiple different primary and secondary roadways, and it'll look great from all angles. So our site access recommendations are obviously for State Road 26 and US 27. That's going to be that's in the FDOT regulation, but we want to limit access along those major roadways to the maximum extent that we can, to avoid conflicts between pedestrians and vehicles, and also to minimize breaks in that primary frontage, and also to encourage master plan development. And like I said earlier, we want to make sure that we're encouraging cross-access between parcels as well. So for service and loading areas, there's some good examples, there's some bad examples. We are recommending that loading areas are not facing public right-of-way. So this is an example from Butler Plaza, where you can see the pink is Clark Butler Boulevard, and all of the yellow dots, which are a little bit hard to see, but all the yellow dots are the loading and service dock areas. They're all located to the backs of the buildings, so that they're not visible from the primary roadway frontage. During the last workshop, we talked about signage and the fact that the language for the Gateway Overlay District, we want to make sure that we're not prohibiting creativity and limiting different ideas. So we want to make sure that it's not too prohibitive. So we're including maximum sizes for guidelines, and I'll show on the next slide. We've kind of got several different tables showing how the sizes are increasing with the speed limit increase, so that it can be visible. The faster you go, larger size text you need. Allowing alternate compliance, requiring materials. So we want to make sure that the architecture and the sign are similar in material. Limiting the amount of changeable copy on signs, so that's the actual sign area. So many jurisdictions will outline the size of the sign area, which is the actual text, logo, font. And so we want to make sure that that's limited so that it's not the entirety of your sign. And allowing the multi-tenant signs for shopping centers so they can have multiple tenants. And then also, we really want to limit the billboards throughout. So you can see that in these tables, the signage is scaled based on the speed limits. So larger sign, faster speed limit, smaller sign, lower speed limit. And these have been developed based on different jurisdictions and different sign area and font size recommendations from different jurisdictions. These are pretty comparable. We've also done a review of the speed limits in that you can see. So that's how those would be implemented, is they would be based on road speed limit would determine what sign type you've got. Yeah. You're challenging my sight ability.
I apologize, Commissioner Williams. So around the core of town, you have that kind of blue color, and so that's your 31 to 50, which is and these are ranges that FDOT categorizes these, and then the orange is 51 to 65. So you really have two different speed zones that will be applicable to this overlay district. With the multi-tenant signs, we also divided that into an undivided, which may be a 2-lane or 4-lane, but there's no median, to a divided, that, like we have in Statement 26, where you have correct, where you have a much broader right-of-way and separation potentially from the use on the other side of the street, so that it's a little bigger. No, sir, but we can take a look at that.
Down trip. You want to change the speed limit?
No, I just got a question. Is there any way to put the zones, what zones? Yeah, the zones. Yeah, and that'll apply to the sign zones too, on those. The speed limit sign.
One's based on
So
speed.
so anyway, so I guess it wouldn't matter then on the speed limit. If we're in a 55 speed limit zone, and I'm wanting to put in this sign that goes in the subdivision entrance sign. And so the entrance may be 25 foot wide, and I want to put a sign up, and it looks like one of them NC Ranch, and it's going to say NC Ranch at Countryway, kind of like a ranch that you're pulling in the ranch. Yeah, like you go into a ranch and it's over the sign, and it'd probably be, maybe however tall that is, but it would go kind of an arch over 25 foot. Would that sign comply in these regulations?
Water tower would.
Didn't we decide the water tower wasn't really a sign, it was more of a...
Correct.
Icon.
Yeah.
So I would say absolutely that it would comply, if nothing else, for the alternate compliance that's allowed by staff based on that sense of place and adding character to the development, if it fits. But we do have height limits on the total structure, And then limits on the copy, which is the actual part of the sign that, is the wording, if you will, and logo of the sign. But
Subdivision entrance tend to be like the material pictures y'all showed us.
Yes, sir.
All the different ones. Is
Yes.
I didn't see no limits on those.
no, and quite frankly, to this point, we focused on commercial and multi-tenant signs. We will look at residential signs as well, because, very well those could be. But I think those architectural elements that could be tied into a sign, that wouldn't count towards your signage requirement.
I mean, in my mind, at a 500-foot depth, we're not going to get into too much residential along the corridors. So we'll get into some, but the whole lot, every developer that's come to us, we've asked for the commercial on the front, residential in the back.
It may be the big entrance to the whole place where you have an off-road
Right.
going to the commercial. Would that be?
But I mean, I like
right to the subdivision, correct?
for both the landscape and signage, I like the word recommendation and guidelines.
Yeah.
Because what we want to do is empower staff to say, this is what we're looking for, but if you've got a different idea, right, and it doesn't quite fit in a box, bring it to us, and that becomes an icon, right? So I just think we need to keep highlighting those. I don't want somebody to come and say, well, look, my strip is an odd number, and I can't put a tree every 100 foot because there's, 410 feet. What do I do, right? I mean, it's a recommendation, it's a guideline, right?
Yes. And
You're back.
Okay, so any other questions on the signage height recommendations? So here's some examples of some commercial signs. So the one on the left is about 6 feet high. We're estimating the copy area on this one is about 30 square feet. When we say copy area, it's kind of hard, but essentially the copy area is the Office Depot text. So we're not counting I'm not sure why Jerry's works and this one doesn't. Oh, okay. It's a special one. So it would not be counting the base of the sign or the decorative elements. We're just counting in that copy area that would be limited, the Office Depot text. Same thing for the one on the right. The copy area on this one would be the EA logo and the text.
And are we saying both of these would be okay in the overlay district? Or are we saying the Office Depot would not be okay? Office Depot is okay, the other one is okay. They both would pass muster, okay?
we're just trying to give you some sense of scale.
I got you.
And exactly what these tables and how they correlate in real life.
Okay.
So then here's some examples of some multi-tenant signs. So like Ryan said, these are just, some examples, but per tenant, you've got about 6 to probably up to 16 feet per tenant. Copy area can vary, but the actual sign heights for these is much taller than your typical monument sign for a commercial. So I'm going to hand it over to Ryan. He's going to talk about implementation.
And this one's really quick. So last time we talked about the importance of pre-application meetings, how it can help both staff and the applicant. So we will recommend that all development types, regardless if it's a subdivision or site plan, has some form of pre-application meeting. And that can be as informal as a phone call to, Mr. Thomas, or an actual sit around a table with any department that is necessary to be at the table. We'll leave that to staff's discretion. We don't want to prohibit an application being submitted, but we do want to emphasize the importance and realize the benefits of that. Then with application requirements, this is at the time of submittal, so it could be site plan, it could also be for plats, but you want to have facade elevations or renderings, something to demonstrate that articulation, the character of the structures, as well as landscape plans and signage plans, just to ensure that staff has the materials necessary to be able to make those determinations. And then with the staff review criteria, these are kind of 4 tenets that we're holding ourselves to throughout developing the code, and we feel that we're consistent with these. So with that, I'll leave this up here. We did discuss, bringing this back in the code form for y'all to take a look at before we go to the Planning and Zoning Board. But we'd be happy to go whatever direction you'd like. And as far as tonight's conversation, if there's anything else you'd like to discuss, we're all ears.
Okay, thoughts? I mean, I think you guys did a fantastic job of taking everything we said the first time and putting it down on paper. Commissioner Farnsworth, are you reaching the mic?
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea to bring it back in a code form before it goes before the Planning and Zoning Board, so we can take a look at it.
Other thoughts on that particular question? And right now, we're thinking 500 feet from urban service area east to west and north to south, right, on 26 and 27. Extends the entire urban service area, correct?
Mr. Mayor, I think there is. Well, I think development could occur outside of the urban service area. So just to be safe, we would extend it to the city limits. I'm thinking, towards the Jonesville area where there may be development in that area.
Doesn't that signal to people that we're open to development in areas that we're not really open to development in?
That's not the indication I would like to give.
Then I'm confused.
Mr. Mayor, I mean, I think the impression that the commission gives is that they're currently open for very limited development outside of our urban services territory. I think that we approved Deer Gardens a few weeks ago. It's outside the urban services territory. In this case, it's a rural agricultural event center. We also have a zoning category called commercial neighborhood, or we could do rural residential like Brian went through. I don't think that it's a negative to say that if it's on the corridor and it's being developed in our jurisdiction, that these standards apply. I don't, because I think that in an ag setting, if someone develops, our ability to regulate what that agricultural development might look like is very limited without it. I think, though, that it's really clearly within the commission's discretion, but I do not think that it signals that you're wanting intense development that we're seeing inside the urban services chair. I think what you're saying is hey, if you come up with a Deer Gardens or a Clark Plantation that just so happens to be within 500 feet of the highway, we don't want to see a corrugated metal building there. We want to see what Mark built there, which is really nice and landscaped to the nines and would comply with these standards from the get-go. Just thought for consideration, may not have to be answered tonight. That could be a question that's still open when we present this, but I think that it's worth the commission's consideration to make it apply on the state road corridors within our jurisdiction.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for articulating what I wasn't able to. I think, having the overlay outside the urban service area gives you that little extra higher level of development if it does occur.
Okay, well, I mean, I absolutely agree with it. It's something we can sleep on. We got plenty of opportunities and we'll come back and tweak this. Commissioner Coleman.
You got, south on 27, you got the railroad. Have y'all thought about that with the 500 foot or, is that gonna be a problem? I mean, from
You talk about putting it on the
town.
west side of the
heading south.
railroad?
Yeah.
I mean, I like the idea that 500 feet is meant to capture the facade of whatever's facing this way. I mean, when you go in south, you get that railroad's already behind. I mean, it's a good question because it's kind of off the side, right? Does that count? Does it not count?
You were saying it incorporated in part.
Yeah.
So as you go along the
Mr. Mayor.
railroad, it might have to be 600 feet to make sure you capture.
Well, in speaking with Mr. New, 15th, 30th, and 46 are the only driveway connections that are going to be there. So realistically, all the development that occurs along that segment of the corridor would face those streets. So you would really be dealing with side yards at that point that would be visible from
Okay, well,
from
that
the
is
Side view
corridor.
of the development, not the front view of the development. The front view would be off of 15th, 30th, 46th.
So with the berm and the landscaping from 27 would apply so that you wouldn't see that development. It'd be green space. So between the railroad track and the development and Sandia Park?
The side yard buffer would apply.
Okay.
Whatever the side yard buffer is, would apply.
Commissioner Martin?
Possibly. And that's open. We're calling these roadway buffers. So that's along the roadway, which, wouldn't require that development to front that roadway. It's along that corridor. So, honestly, I think what we, at least how I've thought through it so far, it would still apply in that situation, regardless of what roadway the development was oriented towards.
Commissioner Martin?
I'm not sure that we necessarily would 100% of the time be dealing with the side yard, because if they hop over the railroad tracks and make a road that parallels the tracks, they could certainly face 2741. And we wouldn't be looking at now that would be an opportunity where Kaylee and Jerry last time was talking about the dual frontage type opportunities and those sorts of things. But if as far as the 500 feet, I'm okay with it including the railroad and not starting the odometer on the other side of the right away for the railroad track. I'm fine. I mean, they're not going to be able to do anything with the first 40 feet. That's not giving me any heartburn at all.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, just from my perspective, I think that the intent is that regardless whether
Yeah, it's on. Regardless of whether it's frontage or side visible, the intent is that within the first 500 feet, regardless of what's in front of it, railway or whatever, we want it to comply with the same visual standard. And so I think, in my mind at least, it should apply regardless of what's in front, railroad or not railroad or anything else. Because if you have an industrial area, you still don't want to see those corrugated metal box buildings from the other side of the railroad. And so I think we'd be safe by saying the 500 feet still apply in terms of the visual aesthetics that we're imposing on the first 500 foot of visible development.
Referring to where the 500 starts,
Yeah.
whether it's at the side of the edge or on the other side of the road.
Got it.
Making a total net of potentially 550.
I'm pretty comfortable with the 500 feet too, because I think that the developer that you're going to get, that if I'm in that at all, I'm not gonna, I want my whole development to have the same feel, so I think 500 feet more than likely captures enough into it that we keep that consistency up and down. And again, guys, I mean, I guess this is a question, Mike's already left the room, but Brian can answer. So, we let's say project forward, we've passed this and it's 2 years down the line and we haven't thought of something or something's not working out. It's 2 readings to come back and tweak it, right?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. We would basically take direction from the commission, write it up as an amendment, and then put it before planning and zoning and then the commission for 2, and it's.
So 6 weeks on the fast track and we can write the course.
Well, and also, I mean, we don't know how much longer that railroad track's gonna be there anyway, So that's why I said, well, yeah, that's why I agree that you start at the road, the 500 feet, because if the railroad track ain't there, there's no anyway.
I appreciate the conversation.
Okay. Do we have any more in the presentation? Miss Peggy, did you hear anything tonight you want to comment on?
I think I did last time we talked about this. Everything seems reasonable.
Okay.
Logical.
Tripp, you got any other questions, thoughts, comments?
What?
We're gonna make everything look like the town center. Okay, so where did Mike go? Oh, okay. So what do you guys need from us at this point? I don't feel like we need another workshop. I feel like we're ready to bring back some language written up that we can.
If your direction is for us to bring back code, we'll be happy to do it.
Okay, so, and you want, Commissioner Farnsworth said, bring the code back to us first, let us get first crack, then send it to P and Z? Or do you want to write up code, send it to P and Z for advice, and then come, which would be the normal?
When I think about it, I don't know that it matters either way, but we're both going to be looking at it. So, I mean, they can scrutinize it first and then.
I mean, the P and Z has been digging in to things pretty well.
Yeah,
Let them.
do a more thorough investigation of it and they have time to do it here.
So you guys will come back, give a presentation to the P and Z, right, saying this, with the actual language written up. We'll get P and Z's recommendation, then it'll come to you guys after that. And we'll continue to tweak it.
Very good.
And if all goes well, we're done June, early July.
Yes, sir.
We have an overlay district, then we can send that out to everybody who's very patiently waiting for us, and we'll all know what we're talking about.
Yes, sir.
Okay? Any,
Berm wall fence, that's gonna be addressed?
in the language of the code.
Yeah,
Right.
so, circling back to that, so, we kind of looked at the landscape buffers in 2 different ways. One for commercial, where you want to, undercut those canopy trees so you can still kind of see through it a little bit. And then the understory trees and the other one would kind of be mixed in there, and then you get a full ground to height of tree screen. So you get everything in between. So that's kind of what how we came up with those 2 different options. When we're looking at the residential, we still have to kind of work out ways to not see over the fence. But, so it's where that buffer is being placed and if it's in combination with, other types of buffers. We've looked at berms and fences and walls as options to be able to possibly supplant some of that landscape material. But what I guess we need is, is there a specific place that you want to dictate where a berm is being placed, or?
Put it up to the street to me.
I mean, I don't,
Where I don't wanna see a house, you wanna see a land, you can't berm everything, cause you got, you wanna put your commercial, for my vision, when you're coming in, you wanna pull in, get to your commercial, but if you got where the subdivision comes out, and then we're lining the road, at that point, that's where we don't wanna see it. I don't wanna see a vinyl fence tearing down and dilapidated in 10 years,
Right.
like out here, that's gonna happen.
Right.
So the big berm, you're hidden, it's no big deal, it's done. Oakmont's got a 4-foot fence. Although the block columns are beautiful, what's a 4-foot fence gonna do? Really, the shrubbery and the landscape is gonna take care of so I think it just needs to be where we can situationally say yes, no, or
Yeah.
that's not gonna work based on, fencing. I don't care about the walls, I ain't really crazy about walls, but anyway, just something that gives us an opportunity.
Some level of confidence that the opacity would be sufficient.
Commissioner Martin.
Well, how does the, I guess the site layout speak to some of these concerns? Because with Newberry Corners, you go in and then the road is back far enough to get a house between the main highway and the interior road, versus Oak Park behind Hitchcock's, where you go in and the road is right there and all the houses are actually facing the main road. So would we want to go so far as to say, okay, you can't even face the back of a house to a main corridor roadway, to any of these roads? You have to lay out your site so that you're looking at the front of the house instead.
And that's challenging.
I mean, it just may be thinking about it too, in too layman's terms, but can we not just simply say the intent is to not see the backs of houses, whether that be through berms, fencing, buffers? I would prefer to not try to dictate it, because every situation is going to be different, and I think that the most creative person in the room is the one who is got the most financial incentive. If we say, this is, we don't want to see the backs, these are our concerns, how best can you fix that for us? And then allow them, because I think those are great examples, right? Behind Hitchcock's, it's not an issue, because you come in, the road immediately turns, all the houses are faced out. That may work perfectly, and the developer says, oh, if that's all you want, then I can rework it, and it comes out like this. I think the problem with Newberry Corners is the road dips down. I mean, when you first turn into Newberry Corners, I'm seeing all the way back. I mean, they put the retention pond right in the middle. I don't just see the backs of the house against the road. You turn in and you see everybody's backyard through the whole neighborhood, So I mean, we're learning as we go here about what looks nice and what doesn't look nice. Commissioner Martin.
And to your point, I think that potentially we can offer that feedback / guidance about, let's figure out a way to avoid this scenario as much as possible.
And to your point, we'll prepare those scenarios.
Is it possible to write code with what you don't want instead of what you do? Just say, we don't want to see the back. You figure out how not to make that happen. Yeah, yeah.
So I think too, I'm not trying to say that, like if you got all this commercial in the front and you step in this thing back, commercial, and then you might have townhouses, then you might have residential. At that point, whatever they face them back there, it doesn't matter to me as far as that subdivision, the way it's built, his layout. What I'm more concerned about is when it's up front and you peel off and you're coming right down the corridor, maybe around the commercial. Or if the whole thing's commercial, then we're good. But the berm, anything else that has a butted up to the road is where I would be concerned about. And then the berms and trees and stuff like that.
And to your point, we'll prepare those scenarios.
So I think too, I'm not trying to say that,
Okay, so Mr. New, you were stepped out. We're comfortable with the presentation we've got. We're going to bring it back to code in front of the P and Z, and then we'll bring it back to the commission with a ideal timeline of finishing this process in June. Any final comments, questions on the dais? Any more feedback we can give today? Other than that, any public feedback? Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and move us into comments then. City Manager, you got any comments? All right. Commissioner Mazon? Madam Clerk, you have any comments? Commissioner Mazon, did you come up with another joke for us?
I didn't know this, but today, when did they start doing this Happy Vietnam Veterans Day? It's today.
Yeah, they're doing.
It's been 2 years?
What's that?
How long have they started doing this? 2 years?
I don't know how long they've been doing it.
Well, I would like to wish all the Vietnam veterans a happy Vietnam Veterans Day. I saw a couple today, and they were wearing their hats. And so,
Old enough to been there.
huh? That's all I got.
I'll pass that along to my father.
going to Harvard, though.
Commissioner Martin? Commissioner Farnsworth? Commissioner Clark? Commissioner Coleman? I have no comment other than to invite everybody, if the Watermelon Festival would like to invite commission and their family, any city staff, Thursday night at Rustic Oak Ranch. And don't forget the commission debates next Thursday night, April 7th, 7 p.m. right here in City Hall. Citizen comment?
Florida, Alabama.
And don't forget Spring Fling, April 9th.
Florida, Alabama, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Are we talking football? Because that's the only sport I care about.
Softball.
Oh, softball, okay. All right, here, nothing else, we are